Hi everyone, so I'm here again to do a big overview of the networking part, right? So in my previous videos, what I did was I divided the networking overview, the AWS networking overview into 8 different sections or parts. But in this video, I will try my best to cover everything in one video. I really hope it doesn't go over 1 hour, but since the previous videos, each part was like over 10 minutes. So this one might be a bit longer, but I hope I am able to cover most of it. And then it's going to help you at some point that you might need help with, right? Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen really quickly and see what we have. Okay, so this is where we are. Just before I go, I wanted to make a confession too. So I am not a teacher. I'm teaching you AWS, and I am not an expert by no means. What I am is just a student who is learning AWS myself, and then trying to teach it at the same time, or kind of sharing my learning strategies with other students who might need, I would say, some kind of tips learning complex topics in AWS, right? So that's where I am. And so yeah, let me just get started. So, okay, let me see what I have. Okay, so that's okay. So this is the bigger picture, right? So we have the different components in AWS, and that's where I will be kind of ending it to this slide. So I will be covering each different part. And at the end of this, I would say this video, we will be able to have covered this entire thing. Right, okay, so let me see what I have. So we go through the part 1, and in this one we'll cover region, VPC, availability zone, private and public subnet, and internet gateway. Before I start, I'm assuming anyone watching this video have a little bit of understanding of AWS, right? So I won't be going into details. And even imagine you're someone who is completely new to it. I would say you will still be able to get something out of it, but you might be missing some, I would say, some concepts here and there. But the purpose for this one is to be for someone who understands it, and also for someone who doesn't understand. By understanding, I mean doesn't have a previous experience or kind of learning in AWS, right? So it's a bigger overview. Even being completely new to it, you will get some points that might be helpful. And then in the subsequent videos, I will be describing all the different concepts, each one separately. So this is a big overview, and I hope it's helpful for anyone watching it. Okay, so starting from a completely blank page, right? What do we have? We have a region, right? So let me just go to my previous slide. So in AWS, we have different regions, and in each region there are different availability zones, and within those availability zones there are different data centers, right? So we have region, within region we have availability zones, and within availability zones we have different data centers holding the data in all the different compute services, the storage and everything for different companies and organizations around the globe. So that's what it is. At the moment, AWS has around 26 geographic regions and then 84 different availability zones. And as you can see, in different parts of the world, and the orange ones are the ones coming up. And then the green ones are actually the ones that are the existing ones. Okay, so starting from a completely, I would say, blank page, what it is. Okay. So let's just drop a region here, another region, another region, another region. So maybe this is in United States, this is in Canada, this is somewhere in Europe, and then this region is somewhere in another part of the world. Doesn't matter where it is, but just dropping different regions around the globe in here, right? And then also adding a corporate data center in here. So we'll be seeing how we're going to be connecting our corporate data center to different regions in AWS. Okay, So we have a VPC. A VPC is actually a virtual private cloud, right? So we have anything that needs to remain more secure and private, we'll be putting that in an AWS, in an AWS VPC, right? And then what does a VPC mean if you have no understanding from before, right? Or even if you have and you wanted to have an analogy for that. Imagine a castle, right? So a castle is a huge, I would say, building, right? And it has a very strong and thick walls around it, right? So no one can enter it or no one can leave it without certain security measures, right? So imagine a VPC as a castle, right? So if you can't remember what a VPC does, imagine what a castle can do, right? Okay. So let's see what we have next. So I'm dropping an availability zone. So what is an availability zone, right? So again, in our castle analogy, it's a ward. And a ward is a specific, I wouldn't say a specific, but a part or a section or a portion in the castle, right? So it's just a ward where maybe like certain things are happening in the specific ward. If you have another ward, then other services or other things will be happening in that ward. And then, so I'm just adding another availability zone. Again, this availability zone would be another ward in a castle. So then we have a public subnet. So what is a public subnet? It can be a public chamber in a castle, right? So it's public because anyone will be able to access it. And then we have a private subnet in our availability zone 1, and then that would mean it's a private chamber where people from the outside will not be able to reach it no matter what. So they have to go through the public subnet and then through the private subnet, right? So it's subnets in here. So from the internet into the public subnet, into the private subnet. So the private subnet are meant that they do not have direct access to the internet or to the outside world. They can have indirect access through the public subnet and outside into the public internet. And the same goes for the private chamber. So anyone residing in the private chamber, they cannot have access to the outside world, but they can have access indirectly through the public chamber and outside into the world, right? And then adding, I would say another private subnet in there. Yep. So that's what I have. And then add another public subnet in availability zone 2, and that correspond to a public chamber in our ward 2. So just increase the size of the public chamber in here. So now I'm adding an EC2 instance, right? So an EC2 instance, just imagine if it's your first time hearing it, it's a worker that's doing some compute services out there. I really don't want it to go any further than this. So this is a worker that's doing some kind of compute services in the cloud. That's it. I think so at this point, that should be enough. And then I would say a counterpart in our private chamber would mean it's a secret wizard, right? So a web server being in a private subnet, we can consider that as a secret wizard in a private chamber, right? So that's, I would say, might be easier for you to remember. So if this is a secret wizard, might not have access to the outside world to talk to anyone, right? And then I'm just adding a MySQL database into my private subnet too, right? So this is the same thing, cannot access to the internet without going indirectly through the public subnet. And then just adding an application. So an application can be anything. For example, that can be a website they're hosting. For example, you can go with www.example.com or any website you're reaching out. So that application is residing in our public subnet because everyone is able to have access to it, right? And then a counterpart for our application is public minister, because the public minister is someone people from the outside can have direct access to, and then they can reach out to them. So and now adding something, if you want this this castle or this VPC, if it has to have access to the outside world, that access has to be happening through a port or through a pathway or through a gate, right? So in here in our VPC world, it's called Internet Gateway. And in our castle analogy, it can be considered our main main castle gate, right? So it's the main gate in the castle. Anything that going in and out, it has to go through that. I think so. I covered part one. It's pretty simple with or without previous understanding of AWS networking part. It's simple. You have a region. Within that region, you have a VPC. A VPC can be considered as a castle. Within the VPC, you have different availability zones. Availability zones can be different wards in a castle. And then within availability zones, we have subnets. And those subnets can be considered as chambers. So we have public subnets and private subnets, or we can say public chambers and private chambers. In anything that reside in the public subnet or public chamber, they can be accessed outside through the internet gateway or through the main castle gate. I mean, anything in the private chamber cannot be accessed to the outside world, but they can be accessed indirectly through the public chamber or through the public subnet. Okay, so I think so that's pretty easy. We covered up to this point. Let's see what we have next.